12 days, 10 people killed, starting in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Alton Sterling, a black man shot by white officers.
In Jesus' name.
Then suburban Minneapolis.
Told him not to reach for him.
Philando Castile.
Please, officer, don't tell me that you just did this to him.
And Dallas, officers targeted during peaceful protests. Followed by Baton Rouge again, more officers ambushed.
You know the timeline and what happened. We're not here to rehash that.
We're here to find solutions for improving and really getting to the heart of race relations, tensions with officers and the communities they serve.
We just have to start loving each other.
They can't be the people that you are afraid of and then have to rely on.
Celebrate the power of unity, to come together to get some answers.
Black, white, we're all in this together.
This is our community conversation.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us for this important discussion. I'm Molly Grantham.
And I'm Steve Crump.
Let's be honest, it is not necessarily an easy conversation to have. We know that, but it is one all of us here at WBTV News want to address.
Molly, candid conversations have been playing out across the Carolinas over the past month, and we wanted to give voice tonight to those sentiments that are being felt in our communities.
So, Steve, let's get to it. We have a lot to talk about tonight, from community policing to grassroots efforts to stop violence and the role of local churches.
But before we get to all of that, we examine the current climate here in the Charlotte area and how we arrived at this point.
Justice for Jonathan!
Organized civil disobedience in the streets of Charlotte came swiftly and loudly after a hung jury failed to deliver a verdict last summer in the case against former CMPD officer Randall Carrick. He was charged in the 2013 shooting death of Jonathan Farrell. According to investigators, Farrell had crashed his car in the middle of the night in a North Charlotte subdivision, knocked on a door for help, and the homeowner dialed 911. Moments later, an altercation occurred with police that resulted in Farrell, who was unarmed, being shot 10 times.
This has been pretty much a fluid situation for almost 2 decades.
Willie Ratchford of Charlotte's Community Relations Committee has closely followed the cases of CMPD officers shooting unarmed African Americans. In 1993, Wendy Gale Thompson was fatally shot during a traffic stop. 3 years later, the same thing would happen to James Willie Cooper. And months after that, Carolyn Bedecker was killed after being shot at a police checkpoint.
We want to have a citizen review board set up so we can make some decisions.
Down with brutality!
Chants from the streets some 2 decades ago did result in a citizens review board being established by members of the Charlotte City Council, but critics feel it doesn't go far enough.
It's still the police policing the police, and you need some power of a citizens review board to have meaningful input into that process. We don't have that now.
Even supporters of the current review board, like Ratchford, agree.
Is it a perfect system? Absolutely not. Can it use additional improvements? Probably so, and I would imagine over time that those improvements will also come.
Now, Charlotte has also seen a couple of instances of police killed in the line of duty.
Officers John Burnett and Anthony Nobles were shot and killed 23 years ago after a foot chase. And in 2007, officers Sean Clark and Jeff Shelton were ambushed after responding to an unrelated domestic disturbance call. The recent police shootings across the country stirring up so much emotion for their loved ones.
This is their job, their calling, and they love what they do. But behind the badge and the uniform is another human being.
We care about people, and we're tired of this happening. We've got to stop it somehow. It's just like I said, we need to communicate. We need to sit down and say, what is it that we can do?
Norcat, the woman you just heard from, recently took part in a unity march with citizens and officers in Charlotte. You know, there have been many marches and protests in the Charlotte area in the past month or so after the situations in Baton Rouge and Minnesota, and all of them here have been peaceful. And current Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Chief Kerr Putney recently told me that CMPD had just about 110,000 traffic stops last year. None of them resulted in shootings. I know Chief Putney has had a lot to say lately about the issue of implicit bias and how that plays into all of this.
There are biases and bigotries, not only in policing. It's in the human nature broadly across the country, in every profession, including policing. And I can't expect anybody to believe just because I put on a uniform, I leave my biases at home. But what we can do is embrace the fact that we all have them, acknowledge it, learn to mitigate it, and then move forward so that that doesn't impact the way we have to perform our duties.
Steve and I recently sat down with a well-respected consultant, Jennifer Davis, to further explore this issue of implicit bias.
Davis does a lot of education work with area police departments. She's been working with CMPD for the last 2 decades.
We're helping people become culturally proficient. That covers more than race, age, gender. That covers everything. For 22 years, I have said it's education and not training. Education. We are educating people about each other. And I always believe it starts with knowing yourself, knowing who you are, knowing what biases you may have, understanding what things, what are your strengths, understanding why you might have some disconnect with certain groups. Why does that happen, and where does it come from?
Do you see and sense true implicit bias inside people, and that judgments are being made before they would ever even get to a scene? Do you see that?
No, I don't see it. I know they're aware of it. But what I see from the officers that come through the sessions that we do is they put on a uniform, they have a job to do. What I think happens is if I can raise your level of awareness to the point that when you have an encounter with somebody and you think that, if I can raise your level of awareness to the point where you say, why am I thinking that? Where did that come from? I haven't even had a conversation with this individual. Then I think I have done at least half of what I intended to do.
In your 22 years, how would you describe what you're seeing now in this environment compared to 2 decades ago?
Internally, I think what I have seen with CMPD, I have seen that organization work really, really hard to be the best police department, I think, in the country. They are some of the finest men and women I have ever met. They are people of faith. They are people who sometimes get frustrated, of course, with the things that go on in the community. They're pretty candid with me and pretty honest with me. They want to do the right thing. They want to be here for the people in the community. Externally in our society, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of work to do. There's a lot of stress and frustration.
Now, Jennifer Davis will soon be holding classes with each and every Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department employee.
And CMPD's training, Steve, has been so successful, Chief Putney has offered the training to each police department in Mecklenburg County and the Sheriff's Office. We are just getting started here tonight with this On Your Side community conversation. We have a lot. Coming up a little later, we're taking the conversation out of the studio and into a local barbershop and a local salon.
And up next, we're looking deeply into the relationship between the local law enforcement community and people within the area where we live. From protests to hugs, how each interaction is shaping community relations. You're watching a WBTV special presentation, On Your Side Community Conversation. Welcome back to this WBTV special presentation, On Your Side Community Conversation. In the past month, there have been many meaningful conversations, meetings, marches, and vigils across our area.
And many of them, Steve, have been emotional. Though each one is different, a similarity is that people express themselves passionately.
Because every time I get pulled over, I know there's a fear that overcomes me.
I'm scared. I'm scared of being in y'all's presence right now, and I'm scared of you guys, but I'm also fearful for you.
How you guys? Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Chief Kerr Putney and other CMPD officers were at this town hall with the NAACP at Little Rock AME Zion Church in Charlotte on July 13th. A 4-hour meeting where all parties, even through their anger at times, said they wanted to speak from the heart.
We're hurting as a profession. This is a different time in policing. It really is. This hard conversation needs to happen.
At a protest a couple days earlier, strong words from the head of Charlotte's NAACP chapter.
There are some folk on the force who hate you if you're black, no matter what you say, no matter what you do.
All of the protests held in Charlotte and the surrounding communities have been peaceful.
That's important to note, Steve. And as Jamie Boll discovered, one protest in Charlotte seemed to make exactly the impact it was intended to, ending in a new friendship between a couple of young men and one CMPD officer.
You can't stop the revolution!
It was Saturday night in Uptown. Across the country, nerves were frayed, emotions were raw, and Patrick Jones was nervous.
I saw what was going on on social media and how people were acting in protest. I'm like, I don't want anything like that. I don't want anything to get too chaotic or crazy, someone getting hurt or arrested or killed.
And CMPD Captain Mike Campagna really didn't want any part of policing the demonstration. He'd worked the 4th, the presidential visit the next day. Then came Baton Rouge, Minneapolis, and Dallas.
I'd gotten to Saturday and I had gone I was with a church group and we were just enjoying a pool party, and I knew that I was only going to be there for a few hours because I had to go back downtown. I had to go back to work.
To, in his words, babysit. He figured a community frustrated would be yelling at him and others in uniform. But something else happened. Campagna met Jones and his friend, Tony Wright.
Myself and one of the other officers, we walked with them and we stopped traffic to help them get across from the intersections, but while we weren't doing that, we just talked.
A police captain and 2 18-year-olds doing something so simple that had become so novel.
You know, it wasn't about any great issues. It wasn't trying to solve the world's problem. We just talked about our families and about what was going on.
In other words, they just got to know each other.
If I have that relationship with Officer Mike, I know that if something is wrong, that he's somebody I can call on.
The captain Facebooked about the experience. Patrick and Tony tweeted about it. It was a step, the toughest of them all, the first one.
This is what I think is what I learned from this the most, is that these 2 young men are exceptional, but they're not the exception.
Amazing story there.
That is a great story. That was our Jamie Bull reporting, talking with, engaging the community. That is exactly what CMPD says it hopes to accomplish with a style called community policing.
That's right, and that concept really came to life when former CMPD Chief Darrell Stevens was at the helm. Molly and I recently sat down with him.
This is one of the most challenging times that we've seen in policing in the 48 years that I've been involved in it. But I think Charlotte is had a different experience than a lot of other communities around the country because of what is a willingness for people to come together.
Some officers said, the grilling burgers and dogs in a neighborhood doesn't solve crime, but you disagree with that.
I do disagree with it. I mean, that act itself doesn't solve crime, but what happens is you have to have a basis to develop a relationship. They're able to have a conversation that turns out that they learn, they're pretty much like each other. They're worried about paying their bills, they're worried about their kids growing up, and they're worried about the things that everybody worries about.
If you were the chief right now of CMPD, what would you be telling your men and women?
I would be reminding them, and I'm sure this is happening, why it is that they became police officers to begin with. They come in with the idea that they can make a difference.
Now, the current CMPD Chief, Kerr Putney, has been making himself and other officers available to the community in hopes of staying in front of current issues. Putney told me that it's important to first listen, allow people to vent, and then come up with a plan.
There's a lot of distrust, there's a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. It's on both sides.
What you don't know is I'm sometimes more fearful when I put this uniform on. Because I'm going to tell you a secret, I'm always black. I was born that way. I'm going to die that way. But I chose to put myself in harm's way.
Then there was this touching story. 2-year-old Brianna meeting a police officer for the first time right here in Charlotte.
I just pumped gas, and when I turned around to walk in the store, I saw this little girl walking up to me, so I just went over and knelt down, and she hugged me and wouldn't let go.
We've been teaching her the importance of law enforcement and how they're supposed to be her heroes, so whenever she's scared or she ever has a problem, because mommy and daddy's not always going to be there, and I want her to understand that she could always go to the police.
Now, that was the little girl's mom. She says it happened so quickly she missed capturing the first part of that encounter on camera. By the way, Officer Brown is the community coordinator for the Hickory Grove Division, so she had a trunk full of toys to share with young Brianna.
That story made a lot of waves when we had it on WBTV. A lot of you really appreciated that story. And each CMPD division does have a community coordinator like Officer Brown.
Still more to come in this community conversation. Coming up in a bit, the role of churches and faith in bringing about change.
And up next, a local community leader and others weigh in on the Black Lives Matter movement.
To me, it's a hypocritical statement to say that they matter when we don't care when we do it to each other.
You're watching a WBTV special presentation, On Your Side Community Conversation. Welcome back to this WBTV special presentation, On Your Side Community Conversation. One conversation happening locally is centered on the meaning of Black Lives Matter.
As WBTV's Colleen Harry found, the slogan has gained a lot of attention, but some in our community are calling for more.
Whenever a life is taken in Charlotte, chances are Judy Williams will soon meet the family and be on the front lines of grief. Williams and mothers of murdered offspring know about lives lost, which is why they're taking issue with Black Lives Matter.
To me, it's a hypocritical statement to say that they matter when we don't care when we do it to each other.
So far this year, Charlotte has had more than 30 homicides. Williams says many of the victims were Black. She's wondering why didn't those lives matter?
Nobody's marching, nobody's protesting the fact that a Black person took another Black person's life. So in order for the Black Lives movement and that message to have meaning, we have got to start with the Black community making Black Lives Matter.
A group recently gathered in Rock Hill
to celebrate the power of unity, to come together to get some answers.
Organizers say the goal is to get to the heart of the matter. For some here, Black Lives Matter has meaning.
People getting killed on camera and everything like that, and it's evidence, and then they get off. That is the main focus of it.
Anthony Hart says for him, Black Lives Matter means accountability. It's about pointing out that some officers are getting away with taking lives. He and others say they're not ignoring Black lives lost in street violence.
I think that the cause in which itself is being lost in is being racially motivated. I think that, we need to promote all lives matter and start really connecting before these instances happen.
All lives matter and unity are themes that have come up at many local events lately.
What we're talking about with connecting with people and overcoming your biases is seeing people as humans first and everything else secondarily.
Coming up, unity gatherings in cities surrounding Charlotte.
And Steve, inside the conversations happening in our local barbershops and salons. This WBTV special presentation, On Your Side Community Conversation, continues next.
Welcome back to this WBTV special presentation, On Your Side Community Conversation. Tonight, we're trying to bring perspective and context to what's happening in our community when it comes to race relations, biases, and unity.
On that exact note, Steve, hundreds of people recently met in Rock Hill for an event called Unity in the Community. It was organized to bring people together for an open discussion with the men and women who enforce the laws in their community. York County Sheriff's deputies and Rock Hill police officers were there. It was a huge crowd, a mix of people, young and old, Black and white, law enforcement, and those who live there.
In order for us, the community and the officers, to make this work, we have to all come together in unity.
It's not their job to be the judge and the jury. And I'm afraid in this country, in one or two cases, we have seen that, where maybe some police officer overreacted.
It should be said, a lot of the most impactful events and initiatives organized in our area have come from grassroots groups, ordinary people just trying to make a difference.
Absolutely, and one of those initiatives in Charlotte is called Cops and Barbers. It started last year with a series of public forums between Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officers and the North Carolina Barbers Association. Now, the purpose is to bridge the gap between the police and the community. That idea came up from former CMPD Chief Rodney Monroe, who was in the barbershop getting his hair cut by his barber, Gene Winchester. He liked the idea because barbershops are a central point where people talk. Tonight, we're going back to the 4th Ward Barbershop, Gene Winchester's place.
And Steve, we're also going into Salon Botanical on East Boulevard in the heart of Dilworth. We asked everyone, Steve and I both did, to be honest.
And that they were.
They were. So what you're about to hear are raw impressions of our community.
We expect to be treated, with a higher standard. These are professionals.
It makes my stomach queasy. Because there's so much dissension, and I think there's a lot of panic on both sides.
But until you retrain your police officers, ain't none of this gonna stop.
Even when you're training, what are the figures that pop up when you're training as far as who's the bad guy? More often than not, that figurine is of a Black person.
I do think that there has been a push to make policemen more accessible, more friendly, not being afraid of the police.
When white officers kill black people, we get upset. But when black on black murders happens within the confines of our own community, we don't show this level of passion.
And addressing that, yes, this is why I said war on two fronts. One of it is dealing with these issues, and the other is dealing with what we have to do within our own house.
Violence in this country is ecological violence, it's economic violence, it's racial violence, it's sexual violence, it's political violence, it's cultural violence, it's violence on every front based on a devaluation of black life.
It would scare me to death to be married to somebody that was in law enforcement. I feel for those families. I mean, I have friends who are married to police officers, and I can't imagine what they go through.
And if you're going to be in a position of any kind of power and authority, then you have to just disengage your personal feelings. And that's difficult to do, I'm sure.
I'll tell you how most white people are. They're scared to death to engage you, to talk, because they're scared to death they're going to say the wrong thing.
When someone says, what are race relations like in Charlotte, how would you describe that?
Depends which day and whom you speak to. I think they've improved greatly.
We hold ourselves accountable by just, first of all, being able to identify what is it that we are striving to accomplish. But our unity has to come first.
White people don't think about race, okay? We don't, because we're not affected.
I think that there are some bad white officers, and there are some bad black officers, and there are some bad white people, and there are some bad black people. And there's lots more good of each as well.
My mama white, my daddy black. So what you call me?
Exactly.
I don't know. I don't put myself in that box. I don't put myself in that box. We all is one.
I grew up during Vietnam, and there's always law enforcement and people in uniform versus all the kids and the students and what have you. So I think this thing goes in cycles, and I think we're in a bad cycle, part of the cycle right now.
And if we're not going to have a real conversation about it, then we continue to always be reactionary.
Believe me, I have lots of friends who talk about this. We talk about this a lot.
And the general consensus is what?
Of my friends, black and white, hopeful.
We have some more great conversations for you coming up.
Next, we explore some of the socioeconomic realities facing our community, and we also have great resources to pass on to you as we get your ideas heard. You're watching a WBTV special presentation on your side, Community Conversation.
How are economic opportunities shaped by the way that people view race? How are people's experiences with the criminal justice system shaped by the way that we deal with race?
Welcome back to this WBTV special presentation on your side, Community Conversation. Local activist Reverend Rodney Sadler raised some thought-provoking questions at a recent NAACP rally. And they're the types of questions several organizations in town have been studying and analyzing for a long time. I sat down with Patrick Graham of the Urban League of Central Carolinas for some perspective.
African American communities, particularly those who are struggling in poverty, actually exist in places where they have low ownership of their home and property. So a lot of what you see in activity with policing in those neighborhoods is generated by that lack of ownership that's there.
What you're saying then is in a lot of these communities that there are people who need to become stakeholders.
They do need to become stakeholders. What's upsetting about this is that we are all caught up still in a racial hierarchy of supremacy. If you look at Ruth, he represents someone, when he had the shootings with the Emanuel 9, he represented someone trying to protect the legacy of white supremacy. If you look at a Micah Johnson there in Dallas, you're looking at someone who's trying to combat it, but both of them become psychologically ill from this notion of racial supremacy and hierarchy.
I told him not to reach for it. I told him to get his hand out.
We got so many going on, man, that it's hard to keep up with. I think that even in that case, I'm going to tell you where it hits African Americans, particularly the case in Austin. Oh my God! That many times, even as black men, there's almost a a feeling of guilt that you can't even protect your women. So if I'm a father, or if I'm a husband, a significant other, a brother, and I roll up on some of these situations, am I to acquiesce to it and just watch it happen? Or am I to stand up?
In some ways, this has become very personal for you.
It is. I was stopped once. Stopped more than one time, but once I was stopped, and I remember it. It was in between Charlotte and Gaston County. And as the officer came to the car, I remember him unbuckling the side of his holster. Now, he didn't pull out his gun, he didn't do any of that, but I remember saying, should I communicate to him that you are now making me very nervous? We don't want to be nervous. We both want to get home safely. Officers are going to have to police other officers. Citizens are going to have to police other citizens. And we're going to have to continuously have dialogue.
Welcome back to this WBTV special presentation on your side, Community Conversation. After a month of marches, meetings, and vigils, many in our community are asking, now what?
Yes, I mean, there's definitely a community conversation happening. The dialogue has begun. We hope this helps it, but many feel it's the actions that now follow that will shape our future.
I've always believed that the part of the solution to the tension that exists between the police and the African American community is doing the real hard work to change those high poverty neighborhoods.
The solution is how we speak and how we deliver to each other. We want to wait for the police to come to us. Let's go to them. Let's speak to them. Hey, how you doing, officer? How you doing? I'm so over here. If you got any problem, come talk to me.
I can arrest you and not strip you of your dignity. And that's where we're going as an organization.
People got to talk to each other at all levels. And you got to remember that people are people, no matter what your skin color is. And it's when we start dehumanizing people and think of them as statistics or that type of person that we get ourselves in trouble.
And a lot of our problems have been based on impulse and people making judgments about others. You have to learn to build relationships, and so you have to know how you do it best and how to connect with anybody else.
The way to fix this is to improve opportunity for all persons, and the way to start doing that is looking at ways we can level the playing field in Charlotte.
And to build friendships. I mean, I've watched the political rhetoric, and they say, well, these guys are dividing us against each other, but we're the party of unity. Unity only comes when people befriend one another, when they take the time to get acquainted with each other, to learn each other's ways, to trust each other.
When we talk about treating each other with respect and dignity, and more important, we get caught up in our notions of morality, but forget the higher calling of ethics, which is how we treat each other.
The young people ought to be here. I think they've got to be a part of the solution, because every major movement that has succeeded for justice has been led by young people. Everyone, including the civil rights movement. When the church and the elders were rejecting it, the young people were out there.
You can't put something bad on one race, one gender. There are good people and there are bad people, and like Sis said, I'm hoping that there are a lot more good people, and I think there are more good people out there.
People think community engagement is us engaging with our community. It's both ways. It's a mutual conversation, dialogue, and then both sides taking action to improve the state of affairs.
And Chief Putney told you, Steve, that we will see new efforts of community engagement within the department over the next weeks.
That's right, Molly. Certainly within the past hour, we've helped give you some perspective and context of where we are as a community. And we want to encourage everyone to continue to be part of the community conversation.
We all have ideas on how to make our communities a better place. And before we go tonight, we want to empower you with some contacts to help you get your ideas out there. Go to WBTV.com/conversation to see a list of community contacts. There's also a place for you to submit ideas to us here at WBTV. We want your ideas. Also at that website, you can watch extended interviews with people you saw in this past hour show. A lot more great conversation there.
Well, the conversation is continuing right now on social media. Just look for the hashtag WBTV and me. I want to say thank you so much for joining us for this On Your Side Community Conversation. I'm Steve Crump.
And I'm Molly Grantham. Good night, everyone, and please keep the conversation going.